my presentation today. It's called Visualizing Storm Impacts, Creating a Content-Rich Timeline with DataGraph. The reason I was motivated to do this presentation is because we've recently had two pretty devastating hurricanes here in the US. On September 26th, Hurricane Helene made landfall in Florida. On Wednesday, October 9th, we had Hurricane Milton. This is a quote, actually both of these are quotes direct from the National Hurricane Center. Hurricane Milton, extremely dangerous Category 3 hurricane, makes landfall near Siesta Key in Florida. And that was just after Hurricane Helene made landfall on September 26th. Both of these storms were incredibly devastating. And from an article yesterday in Fortune, an estimate, though it's hard to estimate the total impact of these storms, but both are believed to be potentially over $50 billion of damage. So these rank up there with some of the most significant storms that we've had: Hurricane Andrew, Katrina, and Hurricane Sandy. You've probably seen graphs like this. I actually was on my Stormwater Advisory Board here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina for 6 years. And my background is environmental engineering. Most of my professional work has more been in the groundwater field, but flooding is something that I'm certainly very interested in as someone who's had a background in hydrology. And I've seen these graphs myself all over the news when meteorologists and newscasters have been talking about these storms. The image that you see here, this is, although I think I cut off the exact location, this is an image from, I think this is the French Broad River in Asheville, North Carolina. You can see the timeline here. This is not a graphic that I created. This is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and it shows you the height of the river and the flood stage. You can see here, this is a major, major flood, and it happened really very, very quickly. Here I have two images that I did make in DataGraph showing a very similar representation of data, but I have two different rivers. On the left-hand side, we have a river in Asheville, North Carolina. On the right-hand side, we have a river in, that's Hillsborough River in Florida. And you can see a little bit from this. Maybe I should have updated this for the most recent data, but you'll see that in a moment. Although both of these storms started similarly in terms of being in the Gulf, they moved very differently. I'm sure you've seen the hurricane tracks. I actually don't have that in my presentation, but with Hurricane Milton going over Florida and Hurricane Helene coming up and coming here into North Carolina. And the flooding profiles here are really, really different. This spike here versus this much more long drawn out. And actually, I don't know if I pulled this in, but we're going to look at some of the sources where you can get data like this, meteorological data. And there's still major flooding going on in Florida today, over a week beyond the actual hit of the hurricane. Now, the previous graph showed you individual rivers data separated. But what we want to do is to combine information to make visuals that provide more information on events such as the ones that we're talking about today. So here, for example, I have three different graphs. I actually have a Google Trends graph. This is showing the frequency of the word flooding being searched on Google Trends. I have a graph here that shows us the data for Hillsborough River. And then I have another graph that is showing me the French Broad River in North Carolina. And you can see the impact when Hurricane Helene makes landfall, the spike in terms of the swiftness of the rise in water level in North Carolina. In Florida, for Hurricane Milton, there is also a pretty dramatic swift rise in this river in levels, also going to major flood stage, but the water is staying there a lot longer. The topology here is obviously very different in Florida than in the North Carolina mountains, and that water is just staying there and taking a really long time to drain. So this is the kind of timeline that I want to talk about how we make this in DataGraph, because this, again, gives us more information and has annotation as well as combining data from very different sources. Here's another example of a graphic that I made in DataGraph. This shows us the entire hurricane season, 2024 hurricane season, with major hurricanes being noted at the top of the graphic, and three different rivers that I picked here. Again, the river in North Carolina. This is Eastern Florida, and this one is Western Florida. You can see how both locations were hit, but have impacts that are clearly very different depending on where the hurricanes are going. The last image that I want to show you here, before I get into more of the detail of where you get this data, is showing me just the time span of Hurricane Helene. This is basically when it became a hurricane, when it was no longer a hurricane, or no longer considered a hurricane. And you can see not only the river gauge data. I guess I should point out here, one thing I did differently in this graph is that the color of the, these actually are points that look like a line, but the colors here are changing with the river levels rather than having those background. I found for a lot of lines, I thought that this was actually a easier way to view more data together. But in any case, we also have images here that show us where the storm track is, just on a little small scale, to get a sense of the movement of this hurricane in addition to this other data that you see here. And sure enough, when Hurricane Helene hit North Carolina, it actually was only, the center of it was only in North Carolina for a very small period of time. Obviously, the storm itself was very large, so there's impacts throughout. But then you can see how there's a massive impact in these rivers in the mountains of North Carolina. Next, let's talk about where I got some of this data. So I wanted to show you how to do some of this in DataGraph, and I definitely need to keep track of the time to make sure that I don't spend too much time on this. I actually have a lot of slides here. But just quickly, two of the sources of data that I have used to get data on these storms are the National Hurricane Center, and then also the National Water Information System is where I actually got the flooding data for specific rivers. Okay, so let's focus on the first one. The National Hurricane Center is where you can get data on hurricane tracks. You can get a tremendous amount of information. There's actually a big HERDAT database. If you go into the DataGraph online examples, in fact, we have an animated version of all the hurricane tracks that they've had. I'm realizing I should probably update that because I think I don't have the most recent data in there, but they have a lot of data at the National Hurricane Center. This is just an example of some summary data for 2024. This is as of today. This particular table has not been updated yet for Hurricane Milton, but you can see the named storms that we've had and the dates and the maximum winds. If you go to that website to get to the archives where you can get all the old advisories, you would go to right here to the National Hurricane Center. And from that, you can get to the list here, which shows you all of the hurricanes. I found actually during the storms that it was really helpful to go to the Hurricane Center itself and look at the advisories that the National Hurricane Center was publishing. I found that this was very helpful. So you can go to each of these storms and look at the archive of what was posted. And then that archive, you can see a timeline of all of the different types of postings from forecasts to public advisories to discussions and wind speed probabilities. There's a ton of information that's available there. Now, this is not in a nice tabular format, but you can pull information out of this, such as when did the hurricanes hit, what time, what were the wind speeds at different times. And at some point, this will all be compiled into the HERDAT database, but that won't happen for some months now. When you look at the actual individual files, they're going to look like this. They're text forecasts and updates that give you, again, information about what the projection of the storm is and where it is at that time. Okay, this is the same basic thing. Okay, so that's one source of information. The other source of information that I used and have been using to pull this data is the National Water Information System. This is a really great website for getting information. In fact, if you go to this water.noaa.gov, it will bring you to this website where you can see the location of every gauge where data is live online in real time that shows you real-time river levels. And what I want you to notice on this one, in fact, I guess I have a better, this is Florida, right? October 17th. So this is just yesterday. And again, the storm hit over a week ago. So these purple locations are river gauges that are still in a major flooding stage. So again, this water is taking a really long time to get back down below flood level. This is the Hillsborough River. This is actually a location over here on the west coast of Florida. And again, all this data we can get. So how do I get this data? The actual tabular data that I can get into DataGraph. Well, if I go to, again, one of these locations, I can click on them. It will bring me to information about that particular gauge site. And there is also, USGS also has a website, waterdata.usgs.gov. That will also bring you to gauge data. So I've kind of gotten to this data from both directions, but ultimately, what you want to do is if you click through these menus, you'll find a page like this where you're able to specify how do you want to find your site. Because let me go back particularly here. If I'm on this slide or at this website and I go to my river gauge, I can find that information for a river gauge, and you want to find the USGS gauge number. Once you have that, forward a little here, I can say that I want to search on the site number. So the way I've gotten this data is just by clicking that button, and then you hit submit, which is over here. That will bring you to somewhere where you can enter that site number for that particular gauge. So you can also search on regions, but I found this actually for me to be really helpful because I can, on that map, find a location, get the site number, enter it here. And then when I hit enter there, it gives you then a list of what's that site is, what's available. I'm going to then click on that site number here. And I'm probably going a little bit fast, but this is recorded. You can come back and go through this. But then there's another menu, and I'm going to show you a really easy way actually to get this data in a minute that doesn't involve actually doing any of this, where you can then give some specifics on the date that you want. That's over here. But what I want you to notice is this button. So to get this through the National Water Information System, you go through these menus. When you get to the point that you can ask for a tab separated version of the data, then go over here and you're going to just click this go button that you see there. Now that's going to give you data that looks like this. Now we have something that we can get into DataGraph. Now, a couple of things I want to point out about these files is that notice on the left-hand side how there's a hashtag. So that hash indicates that this is a line of data that is informational, and it's not the actual data itself. And DataGraph will recognize that. And the other thing, of course, is this is the data that we want to pull into DataGraph. But every time you get to one of these pages, I want you to go to the actual, it doesn't show it here on Safari when I took the screenshot, but if you go to that header bar to see where it is, there's a link that is pulling this data, that's getting that data. So for example, one of the links I used to grab data, looked like, what am I doing wrong here? Here it is. Right there. Looks like this. So this is actually a query to the National Water Information Service, Information System, sorry, that is telling the server that this is going to, that's you're requesting the data from, all these attributes of data that you want. So in the actual header that gets generated, when you go through this online system and you say, give me the data in tabular format, it basically just brings you to a website that has a link that looks like this. And if you break this down, then within that server that you're going to, there are all these individual asks that you're giving, including what is the site number, what is the begin date, what is the end date. Now, what's really convenient is that I can use this information in DataGraph, and I don't even have to go to that website to get that data. So that's what I wanted to show you. I thought this was really, really cool. So I hope that this is useful, and I think there's other sources that you can use this for. So getting this data into DataGraph, if you go into DataGraph and you go over to the side panel, there is the other drop-down menu, and you can see how there is a link to URL or file where you can query web APIs is essentially what we're doing here. So for example, getting this river stream data, the height data, I can type in the URL or copy and paste that. And then each of those asks, instead of having this really long text, this is just a note here that's on the left-hand side showing the original query. I can just type in what I want for each of these. And it just makes it so much easier, because then once I have this set up, I can just go in then and change my site number to get data for a different site. Okay, so this is just a zoom in on that. I guess what I wanted to point out was that you can, since this is directly connecting to their server to get the data, you can save this column content. If you click that, then it will save a version of the information in the file. So even if you're not online, you should have it. You can also do a timed reload. I have data that's being updated online. The stream data, it's updated very frequently. So I can actually click this and then have my file be checking on some time increment, going online and grabbing that data for me. And this is what it's going to look like. So here's some data that I've connected to online. Here's the gauge data for one individual site location. You'll see how these are all in bold. This is not data that I can change since I'm getting it from this server. I don't want to change it. One thing that I will say to keep in mind in the file that I created, what I found was the site number I can easily change to get a different site, but the column numbers or the names of the columns do change for these two columns that have the actual gauge height data. So when you change the site number, you also just be cognizant of that you'll have to update, and it's quick to do, but you'll just have to select those columns to get that working. And again, this is just connected online. It's a single graph. This is showing me data for the French Broad River in Asheville for just a single location. So this will look like a data group when you have this set up just for one spot. But again, what I want to do is I want to combine multiple rivers and multiple locations and other data that has a time element to it. So the convenient way to do this in DataGraph is to use the split Y functionality. Every time I click this, I can make another Y axis. So you see here, just to look at the basics of this. So I can have a number of these all stacked up. And that's essentially what I'm going to do and what I'm going to show you in the file that I created. So, and the way that we change data from being in one file to another file is that we can, in one axis to another axis is that we interactively can use these visuals, a visual indication of which axis is this on, to change where it's located. The other technique that I use all the time is to also, if we're going to add labels, I'm going to create several, or if I wanted to put several different elements on this one graph, then I could put them in a group. In fact, that's what I would recommend that you do. So say, for example, I wanted to have some label at a specific location. So first of all, when I added this, it went into to a different, oops, no, I don't want to zoom. There we go. Went to a different location. So here is my label command that I added. And I can position exactly where this is. Now, if you've never worked with dates in DataGraph before, then when you're just positioning an individual item at a specific location. So say I wanted to mark the beginning of Hurricane Milton or Hurricane Helene, and I wanted to mark that date. So let's say I'll just put in 2024 10 here. So do you see, maybe I should make this line a little bit bigger here. So, not that one. Let's do that for this is the one that I want to make bigger so that you can see this. And I'll even make it red just to really, so that you can see that. Oh, and make the arrow red too. Okay. So if I want to point to that specific location, I can type in an exact date. So if I want to do this, let me turn off the hover, I can either click and drag this and it will go to a specific date. So notice, oops, I'll do my zoom. Notice if I click and drag this around, that here is where you see the date format. And again, I can type in, if I want to note something that happened on October 10th, and I can even do the time exactly. So 08, actually, maybe I should do, just so you see this. So here's my, you know what, let me actually, I can show you how to, if you decide you don't want all these splits, you can delete those and then it's all now in one graph. So maybe you can see this a little better. So I can pinpoint this location with my label, or again, I can type it in. And I guess I'm, maybe I'm being a little lengthy on this, but the way that the date works, this is a good way for you to maybe even just see how it works, because now I'm getting to a very specific location in my graph, and the date format is the year followed by a colon, followed by the month, colon, day, colon. Then I have the hour and the minute, and I can even add in seconds into this. So I'm being able to specify a very exact location of time that this is occurring. In fact, here, I didn't do this in my other graphs. The time is an X value that I can put in here. So this is almost a little opposite of what I did in my other graphs, but I used the token, the X value token, that creates this blue token for the time. And then I can click on that token and specify what I want it to see. So here, for example, this is telling me the exact moment that this river crested. It's actually sort of an interesting representation of this. Okay, so let me keep going, because I had this, I wanted just to show you this as kind of an introduction, because the examples that I have are a lot more complicated than that. And let me go to the one that I have that is like this. So first of all, now when you look at this file, you'll see that there are, again, I have my multiple splits where I have different information, and each of the split graphs I've put into one group in terms of all the commands that are controlling what is in that group. And there's two reasons why I would recommend doing this. I mean, one is just that it's convenient. So when I look at this graph, I see I have 4 different y-axes, and I have 4 different groups where all the commands that are drawing things on those axes are grouped together, right? The other reason why this is convenient, because here I'm using a fill to show the height of the river. The points are colorized for the flood stage, and then I also have the label here. But if I changed my mind about where I wanted these commands to be shown, I have these indicator buttons that let me click which axis they're on. But if I have a lot of them, that can be sort of tedious, and making sure everything is on the axis I want it to be. So if I decide I want the North Carolina data at the bottom, for example, of this image, then I can click the gear menu on this group and say to move to a different y-axis. The bottom axis is always going to be number 1. And when I do this, now it combined all that on the same one. So since I moved this one to the bottom, I don't have to move it here, but I just visually, it helps me to know where did I put things. And if I want the St. John's data to be higher up, I can again use that gear menu and move that one now to axis 3. So now I've been able to switch these around very quickly. So again, the technique would be drawing individual commands, creating the group of graphs that represent a certain set of data, and then I can move around where those are located. So what else do I have in this graphic? Now, one of the things that I have here is the representation of the storm data itself. This is using this table of data that you see right here, where I have a list of the hurricanes, the name, and the begin and the end. And I was only going to initially focus on Helene and Milton, but when I saw the data for this particular creek, which is on the eastern side of North Carolina, I was certainly noticed that, well, there were some flooding events earlier in the year. So I thought it would be appropriate to show other hurricanes. Now, I don't know for sure because I haven't checked. Are these the reason why there was flooding here? But it certainly seems like that is a certain possibility, absolutely. In any case, the command I'm using here is a lines command. Actually, this one's the lines command. This one is a connect command. And these are allowing me to do 2 things. Here, I'm using this one, you can see, to draw the beginning and end of each of the hurricanes. So this is easy to do. And then I've also specified a row that I want these in terms of the y-axis. And this command here is showing the lines of the start date of each of these hurricanes. And this lines command is really convenient for going across all the graphs. So you can see it's not just drawing in one location, it's drawing all the way across. And I'm doing that by changing this option here, the extent option. By default, the lines will be drawn just to at the on the axis that it's shown on. So by default, it'll just say this axis, and it would only show the lines there. But again, if I change this to all axes, then it goes across all of my graphs of data. So I think that that's a really nice way to be able to do that. Another command that will also do similar things, if you go under the toolbar, the range command also is another way to highlight a particular range in time and have it, you can tell it to go the full extent of a graph, so it'll go across multiple graphs. Now, the other thing that I wanted to show you that I did here was, again, the thinking about how to take this data if I had a lot of different content, not just labels and my representations of my data, but here I also added these images. Now, if I had a whole bunch of images that corresponded, or text blocks that corresponded to different events that happened along this timeline, and I want to show all of them, it may be more content than I could feasibly show in a 8x7 graphic. So in this graph, I'm showing all of these, actually just these two images here. If I hide this one, this is an image that shows when Helene reached Florida, and then I have another image that shows when Helene reached North Carolina, but they're just overlapping each other here. So what I have here is actually an animated version of this timeline. Let me bring this back to the beginning and show you how this works. So here, if you had a really long series of events, you could actually animate them. So I had this starting in July. June is the beginning of hurricane season, but there's not much that happens in June. And then you can see, here's the first hurricane, here's some flooding here. I can stop this and pause it if you wanted to get a better look at what was going on. So we can see that hurricane moving through. I want to keep going here. Now I'm into the end of August, and here is another hurricane, Hurricane Francine. And now we're going to get into, again, here's Hurricane Helene. And so these images that I added in give you a visual clue of when Helene hit Florida and when Helene made its way into North Carolina. But I could add in a whole series of different images or text blocks that gave me some information on, a variety of different types of information that I could add into here. Now, I mentioned about the flooding in Florida, how it is still really quite an issue. This data was just updated. Now, I think, I don't think I changed the end date. I should actually have that be dynamic in this, so it would do it based on the data itself. So St. Johns River, still a major flood, and it is not changing much. The projection for St. Johns River on the I think I have this wrong. This is actually on the east side of Florida. I'll have to fix that in this file. And that, again, would be another thing that I could include on this, would be a map that would show me where each of these locations are. And these, I guess I didn't really talk about how I brought these images in. These are just images that I copy and pasted from online. I brought them in. This is actually a larger image that comes from the from NOAA again, and I just zoomed in and clicked on this section of Florida. So I can, within the graphic command, if I bring in an image, I can actually interactively click and drag to crop to certain locations. And then only that part is what I'm going to see in my timeline. So if I go back and show you the graphic here. So here's the clip that I took of this larger map of the US. And you can see how it's moved, how I've, again, this is connected directly to this. So that's really quick to do. I've also scaled this down from the original size of the image. Thought it would be kind of interesting to have a whole series of these, but that was as much as I had time to prepare. So I have talked a lot. I hope that this was helpful and at least somewhat inspiring in terms of some of the things that you could do or possibly create in terms of not just using this type of data, but pulling together time series data from various sources. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has, or if there's anything you want me to explain a little bit more. I didn't really talk about how I made this, though this is also, again, connecting to, or maybe I just pasted this. I think this was before I was connecting to the data. This data I just pasted in. And I have the Google data also in here. One thing that I think is really, really key to understanding how to pull together these various sources of data is that you can have data that's on very different time scales and has dates in completely different formats, and it really does not prevent you from putting that all on the same graph. I've had people before that are very used to the spreadsheet way of compiling different sets of data, feeling like they have to have only one column of dates and all the data kind of put into this giant matrix. And that's not the case at all with DataGraph, because it's going to handle the dates and pull them together properly. So, for example, here, just to show you really quickly, if I wanted to pull together my date data from my Google Trends and put that on a line, so that was very easy to do, right? And you can see the format for these dates. This is just a basic year, month, day format. If I go to my data for the French Broad River, this is an entirely different date format. I mean, this looks actually pretty complicated, right? This is showing me the year, month, day, has the time, the hour, the minute. I also have the Z here. I honestly don't remember what that means, but DataGraph knows what it means. I didn't actually have to do anything special. I just pasted this data in. You may, if it doesn't automatically recognize this as a date, you may have to right-click on a column and have it change to a date format. Here it's already a date, so it doesn't matter. But just to illustrate this, I could change this to something that's not a date if I pasted it in and it wasn't recognized immediately. But then if I right-click and I convert to a date, again, it just picked up this format and just works. Another thing that DataGraph will do with dates of different types is it will make a suggestion. So if it's still not quite getting the right date, or maybe there's multiple options, then there will be a suggestion here for, here's what DataGraph thinks the date is. You can pick which one is the right one. But in this case, it does it properly, so that, again, I can just take this and plot this data, split the y-axis, put them on different, at different locations, and then add in other information. So thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate it sounds like many of you felt that this was helpful and interesting to see what I've done. I'm not sure, this was maybe more of a demo than a tutorial, so I'm glad that this was helpful to see how to work your way around the software. Are there any other questions that anyone might have on anything specific? I like that comment. Thanks so much. Some inspiration for things that you can do with DataGraph. And even if you're plotting chromatograms, that's still, that's a time series. It's just a very different type of a time series on a very different scale. But this is what I like, is the ability to combine all these different things and, add in the labels and put all that on there as well. Great. So thanks so much, everyone. I will be pulling some of these files together and putting an example file, or probably at least two, because of these two different files that I have here, putting these online. And in the meantime, if there's anything else that we can help you with, then of course, let us know. You can email us, help@visualdatatools.com. We will not be doing a webinar next week, but plan to be back the week after that.